بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم آمين وبعد. We continue with سفينة النجاة by Sheikh Salim ibn Abdullah al-Hadrami rahimahullah ونفعنا الله بعلومه في الدارين آمين. We have 4 masail that we're going to address from previous durus. 3 of them are pertaining to zakah, one is pertaining to Jum'ah. So the first one is regarding Jum'ah. We read in one of our lessons that the sunnah for the imam is that the imam is still during the khutbah and that he keeps his hands down, and the imam shouldn't be making hand gestures in the khutbah. And so the preferred opinion or method of our ulama was that when the Prophet ﷺ, he gave khutbah, he was calm and there wasn't a lot of physical movement. The one time the Prophet ﷺ would make a movement is when he would point his index finger, or in Salat al-Istisqa, and that was the only time he raised his hand. Besides that, the Prophet ﷺ during khutbah, he didn't use movement. And there was a discussion, I was listening to one of the scholars address this issue. He said, in Western culture, they speak about movement and engaging the audience with hand gestures and things like that. And he said, in the history of our ummah, especially in the position of khutbah, the mashayikh were always in a state of khushu'. And so a state of khushu', when you're in a state of concentration and humility, there isn't movement. You're very still and calm. And so he said the nature of the khutbah is not like public speaking. When you're speaking at an event or speaking at just a general lecture or something of that sort, where you're not speaking on deep, meaningful spiritual topics. It's more educational. You can use hand gestures and things in an educational setting. But in the khutbah setting, you can't. You don't use gestures, you don't use movements, you stay very still. The other thing the Prophet ﷺ used to do, he used to have a sword, right? So there's this sense of positionality. You have to be firm in your position and you don't move. And so the scholars even discourage excessive movement of the head towards the right and left. They said your movement should be minimum. So of course there's a minimum movement. As human beings, we can't be still for too long. So that's fine. But this kind of movement, to extreme size and consistently moving the body and the position of the khutbah is something that is actually against the sunnah, according to the opinion of the classical ulama. And some of them even said this is a ijma', this is a consensus, that this is the way of giving khutbah in our tradition. We don't move around, we don't move our heads, we don't move our bodies, we don't move our hands. So I wanted to address that masala and just kind of put that into context, why that was the tradition compared to Western tradition on public speaking, and this difference between giving a khutbah versus speaking versus doing an educational lecture. There's a very clear difference, and the khushu' of those two occasions are different, and so they have different etiquettes and adab. And this is from bab istihbab. It doesn't nullify the khutbah or anything of that sort. We're just talking from a point of etiquette and istihbab. The second mas'ala is regarding zakah. And so this is the zakah on 401k, people who have 401k. And so there's a lot of discussion, but kind of the position that many of the financial experts and zakah muftis give is that generally there's no zakah on 401k until you're able to cash out. And the reason is 401k is inaccessible wealth. Until you're much older, you're a senior or you just have a few years from retirement, I think over the age of 59 or something, then you can access it. Before that, you can't access it. If you do, you have to pay interest rates back and so on and so forth. And so they say inaccessible wealth, there's no zakah on it. Inaccessible wealth, so let's say somebody owes you $10,000, they haven't paid you for a few years, you struggle to get it back, you've struggled to collect it, there's no zakah on that money. But if it's immediate, if I gave you $5,000 and brother, you're like, I'll pay you back in a couple of months, that money I have to calculate in my zakah because that's immediate. I'm going to access it. But inaccessible wealth that you can't access for a long period of time or you don't know when, there's no zakah on that. And so in general, 401k, there's no zakah. until you receive it. As soon as you receive it and you possess it, you pay zakah immediately. You don't count a year from that time. As soon as it's in your possession, you pay your zakah on 401k. And so that is the first mas'ala regarding 401k. The second mas'ala is regarding jewelry other than gold and silver. What is the zakah on jewelry other than gold and silver? And the ruling is there's no zakah on jewelry other than gold and silver, unless you're engaging in trade. You're selling it as a product, or you're buying it as an investment. If you're buying it as an investment, where you're like, I have some money, I want to invest it somewhere, and you buy jewelry as an investment, or you're buying it, and the investment one is there's still debate about it, but you're selling and trading that time. But if a woman just has a diamond jewelry set, a diamond ring, or anything of that sort, even if it's expensive, a diamond ring can go for thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands, and so on. There's no zakah on it. There's no zakah on it. Some scholars say if the amount is extremely high, then there's a zakah, and that again is a topic of debate between the ulama. The last mas'ala is the zakah on real estate and rental property. If you have a commercial property that you lease, or you have a rental property or a residential property that you lease, you pay zakah on it. At the end of the year, you pay zakah. You calculate the total amount of rent you collected for the year. So let's say you're collecting $1,500 rent every month for 12 months, right? So that's going to be $18,000 in rent that you collected over a year. You subtract from that the expenses of running the house. If you have a mortgage, you can subtract the mortgage. If you have, maintenance costs and insurance and whatever else you pay, you deduct all of that. And then whatever was your net income, that's what you pay zakah on. If the rental amount is less than $5,000, maybe you have a property international somewhere back home, you get $300, $400 a month after 12 years, 4 times 12 is 16, right? So you got maybe, 1,000, or even no, that wouldn't be correct. 4 times 12 is going to be 48. You get 4,800, right? So you got 4,800. So, it's less than the zakah. Because zakah, to pay zakah, it has to be over 5,000. Make sense? So for the zakah on rental property, if the rental amount you're getting is over the nisab, then you pay zakah. If the rental amount you're getting is less than nisab, there's no zakah. Is that clear? Yes, brother.
You say that, okay, we already have the zakat pay now, right? And can the rental add on that or no?
Yeah. Oh, you added to the original amount?
No, okay, right now I have 10,000 in the bank, right?
Cash. You saying, can you add cash to?
But I have rental too.
Yeah.
But so my rental only 4,000.
Yeah.
So that's should be 14,000, right?
Do you add that to your cash assets? Wallahu alam, the way I understood it is no, you don't. You don't add it. Because there are different types of wealth. Gold and cash, you add. Gold and cash and silver, you add the total value. For rental property, no, you don't.
You get cash too, right? Rental, you get cash too?
That's true. It's possible. I would have to check on that. Does it add to the nisab of the gold and silver, or does it not? I would want to check. I'll check on that, inshallah, and I'll get and we can discuss that. So this is the issue of nisab. We learned that for zakat to be obligatory, there's a minimum balance, a minimum threshold you have to reach. That nisab is calculated as 84.8 grams of gold, which is roughly $5,000. So once you have $5,000 of cash, gold, silver, stock, crypto coin, all of that, if it's more than 5,000 and you have it for 1 year, you pay zakah. So you're asking, is the income from the rent, does that count towards the nisab of your cash and gold and stocks and your crypto and Bitcoin and all that stuff, right? Do you add that, or is this separate nisab? I will double check. I'm not confident about the answer. So inshallah, we will double check and get back to that, inshallah ta'ala. So that is the last mas'ala regarding zakah. Any questions regarding that? It's clear? Haji, did I answer your question from last night? Yeah, so we just have this last question on nisab, inshallah. And then we'll
I want to know, exactly, but because the month you ran, right? This month is not 1 year yet.
yeah.
You see?
So after a year, you pay it after a year. Yeah.
No, it's about a rental.
The rental.
Yeah, the rental.
It's a year's fee.
It's not 1 year yet.
Yeah, so there's no zakah now. When the year ends for you, you pay zakah. If so, you have a tenant, they've paid 5 months, 6 months of rent. It's okay. There's no zakah. A year has to be complete for you to pay rent, zakah on your rental.
But Sheikh, you have to hold on to that money, right?
No, you don't have to hold on to it.
Even if you spent it,
Even if you spent it.
you have to pay.
Because this is an investment property. It's kind of a business. Does that make sense? It's kind of a business. So the zakah of it is very different.
So you
Because like,
you calculate whatever you get during
after the year, yeah, at the end of the year, you calculate your income minus your expenses, and then you pay your zakah on it. Even if you spent all that money. If you spent it back on the property, no. Do you understand? If you spent it back on the property, no, because you use all the money you received. If you're getting a $2,000 rent, but your mortgage is $2,500, you spent the money. There's no profit. Does that make sense? Yeah, you put it back because you're paying off your property, right? But this is your property is paid off. You own it, and now you have a profit of $30,000, $40,000 after a year. Does that make sense? Then you pay zakah on it because this is profit. This isn't you don't have expenses. Does that make sense? So on that you would pay zakah. After the completion of 1 year, you pay 2.5% of that.
It's different from an income, right?
It's different. We don't pay zakah on your personal income, but that which you use as investment, you do. And we talked about this. So we don't pay zakah on your check. Every month you get a check, there's no zakah. You pay zakah on savings. Is that right? You pay zakah on savings. Your weekly check, you're getting one monthly check, your salary, there's no zakah on that. Is that, what do you have in your savings? How much cash, gold do you have after a year? But this one is different because it's more of a business. So we're not, that's why do we merge it with the cash and gold? That's why I'm not sure, because it's a different category. It's not the category of cash and gold. Cash, I'm going to tell you, brother, how much do you have, saved? I look at your savings. Do you have 5,000 in your savings for over a year? Then you pay zakah. 5,000 or more. Make sense? If you're living check to check, no. You don't pay, there's no zakah on you because you're living check to check. So you don't have savings. So there's no zakah on you in that case. Yes, brother? Investment, as an investment, yes. If you're investing in land, so that as a way for your property, your money to grow, yes, you pay zakah on it. Because this is an investment. You see, it's different. If you're buying land for you to live on or work on, it's different. But you're buying this land, you're like, I have some money sitting at home. I want my money to grow and to profit, right? You don't want just some money to sit. So you want to invest it. So you invest it in a property or in real estate or in land or in anything. You pay zakah for that.
So you have to count on yearly?
Yes, after a year you pay zakah. On the total value of the land. After the year, you see the value of the land, you pay 2.5% of zakah on that. Wallahu alam. And these aren't, this isn't unanimous. I'm pretty sure within different schools and different scholars there's differences. So if you want to consult, I referred yesterday to Sheikh Joe Bradford. He's a sheikh that's based somewhere in Texas or California, I forgot. But he's a zakah specialist, and he offers a service. So if people want to consult, he'll look at your assets, and you can give him numbers, what you have. He'll give you all the opinions, all the fatwa, all the details, and he'll give you a personal fatwa tailored to your personal financial, investments and assets. So that's what I always encourage people. For zakat, these are just general durus. I'm just giving you information, educational, right? But when you want personal fatwa for your case, you should speak to a sheikh, an imam, somebody, so that you can get a fatwa customized to your circumstance. Does that make sense? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have two, but first, how about you, like, you make intention, you pay full zakat, but right now, you don't know you in debt, you don't pay like completely, So how do we pay back? Like I owe 5,000 zakat.
Yeah.
So how do we pay back?
You owe zakat and you have a debt? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Repeat.
I mean debt with Allah, like 5,000.
Yeah.
How do we pay back?
You pay to the fuqara.
Just pay back 5,000.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, so the question is, if you haven't paid for your zakat for many years, what do? You calculate all the zakat you owe. You see, okay, I owe 5,000 in zakat. You pay it immediately. You don't delay it. Immediately you pay it. And you give it to the categories of the people that receive zakat. We mentioned 8 of them last night. The fuqara, the masakin, al-amilin alayha, wal-mu'allafati qulubuhum, wa fi al-riqabi, wal-gharimina, wa fi sabilillahi, wa bin sabil. The 8 categories, it's in the book. Right? So you can, and then there's organizations, right? There's organizations that do zakat distribution, one. Or yourself. If you know, a lot of us, we come from, right, international, other countries. And there's, in a lot of these different parts, we have family members, community members, relatives that are, masakin. Maybe they have income, but the income is not enough for all of their needs. You can give to all of them, and it can be your zakah. Does that make sense? So you can distribute it like that, inshallah. I just helped a sister a few weeks ago calculate her zakah. She has zakah for 3 years. And I told her, you were being careless. The zakah is a fard. It's the sibling of salah. Those two ibadat, they go together. Don't pray with your zakah. The warning of not paying your zakah is very dangerous. It's of the gravest sins. So she had to pay 3 years of zakah back, right? So it's very important that once we have savings and once we're making investments, go make sure you understand the ahkam of zakah correctly. Does that make sense? Because you're risking your akhirah. Right? Nobody wants, the sin of not paying their zakah. The warning is great, Those who don't pay their zakah, inna ladina, subhanallah. Like Allah, there's a warning, these people that they hoard their wealth and they don't pay their zakah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will burn them with the wealth that they used to hoard. They used to save all this wealth out of greed. They didn't want to give the wajib in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That wealth that they were hoarding, that wealth is going to be their torment. وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ, right? So it's serious. Like the warning of not paying your zakah is serious, right? So it isn't something we should take lightly. If you're living check to check, alhamdulillah, you don't worry too much about zakah. Bismillah, go enjoy your life. Khalas. But if you're living comfortable, now, okay, look, I have a business, I have good income, I have a nice salary, my wife or my woman or husband is working, they're investing and they're diversifying their investments. At this point, it's obligatory. It's wajib. You have to learn, right? Because there's amana. Allah has given you all this wealth, so you are obligated. Like, you want to pray, you want to make salah, but you don't learn the ahkam of salah. Is that going to work? It doesn't work. So once you you make a lot of money, you have to learn the ahkam of zakah, so that you fulfill the wajib and you don't incur the debt. And if you don't pay it, just making tawbah is not enough. You can't say, Ya Rab, I make tawbah, forgive me. Khalas, just move on. No, you have to go back. 5 years, 10 years, whatever. You have to count. When did I first start saving money? You look at your account balance. You say, maybe 2018, I had 5,000 in my account. Ever since 2018, my balance has kept going up. I kept buying and investing. So you have to pay zakah from that time. Maybe since 2010, somebody was, subhanAllah, they were negligent of their deen. They were just making money. They were careless. Now they make tawbah. We tell them, brother, you have to go back. From the day you got 5,000 nisab for 1 year. And we tell them, from that day, calculate your zakah. Go speak to a zakah expert, calculate your zakah for 14 years, and pay your zakah. And for him, he would do it as best as he can, but eventually he has to pay it all off, right? So that's the situation of zakah. You have to pay it off. Even after tawbah, you have to pay it off. It is not waived. You know what I mean? It isn't waived. It doesn't go away. You have to pay it. Did you have something in addition to this? Tafadhal.
You see, like some someone they intend to buy like they already have a place, right? But they already buy the property. They say they're going to live like next to the masjid, you know. But right now it doesn't work out. Then they're going to sell the land. I have to pay a zakat or not?
If you possessed it for over a year, and the intention, how does the intention affect the situation? Is interesting. I won't give you an answer now. Let me think on it, and then inshallah I'll save it. I understand. You bought it with the intention to use it for a personal property.
Yeah, with the groups.
With a group, with an individual, but you intended it for a personal use. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But then your plans didn't go accordingly. So now you're ending up to sell it, right? And you had this property for some time. Do you pay zakah on it or not? Let me think on that, and then inshallah I'll get back to you on that, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Make sense? Inshallah. Tafadhal.
Just the categories.
The categories of people that receive zakah?
Does it matter if they're related to you?
No, we mentioned in last night's dars that the only people you cannot give zakah are your spouse, your parents and ancestors, like grandparents, great-grandparents, your children and descendants. Your great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, you can't give them zakah. The people that you're obligated to provide for. Your siblings, your cousins, your aunties, your uncles, it's not wajib. Of course it's silatul rahim, right? We're going to take care of our relatives, right? There's so many ahadith about taking care of our relatives. But it isn't your nafaqah that's wajib on you. If you don't do it, you have sin yawm al-qiyamah. Does that make sense? So those people, you can give them your zakah. And we mentioned you get 2 ajr for that. You get the ajr of zakah and you get the ajr of silatul rahim. Tying, strengthening the ties of kinship, of family ties. So that's why the scholars, they say, they prefer, if you have poor relatives, give it to your poor relatives first and distribute it amongst them. But diversify it. Don't just give it to one person. Spread it out. Right? Diversify the wealth. You don't want to take just one whole zakah, you just take one person here. At least, a few people and different causes. Even if you can do different needs, see if there's other causes, local, if there's something locally, inshallah ta'ala, diversify. Does that clarify? I have 2 questions. The issue of nisab, does the value of investments get added to the total nisab of your gold cash, or is that separate? And then the second one is, you bought a property with the purpose of for personal use, but then you ended up selling it and you made some profit. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that investment? So inshallah, those 2 masail, I'll save it and get back to you, bi'idhnillah, inshallah. Tonight we're going to start Kitab al-Sawm, and then this is the last chapter of the author's book. There's some commentary, but inshallah we're just going to try to conclude Kitab al-Sawm. The author, rahimahullah, he says, fasting Ramadan becomes wajib with the attainment of one of 5 things. So the fasting of Ramadan becomes wajib with one of 5 events. What are they? And so here is saying, like, what he's talking about here is, how do we know when to begin Ramadan? And we always talk about, right, like moon sighting and moon fighting, right? Right, and people in masajid are fighting about, how do we sight the moon, and this person, like this country sighted it, and this person said, no, this place sighted, no, this person is not reliable. That whole debate, right? What do we do? What are the ahkam? And so here he's going to give us some commentary, and then inshallah I'll add as we go along. Number 1, he said, on the completion of 30 days of Sha'ban. This is easy, right? The month is either 29 or 30. If 30 days are done, you fast. The next day you fast. Clear cut, no debate. Easy. The issue is when you have 29 days, then is like the difference. What type of sighting is valid? What type of sighting is valid? Number 2, he says, by the sighting of the moon, for the person who sees it, even though he is a fasiq. So he says, if you see the moon, no matter who you are, you have to fast. Even if nobody believes you. Pretty much. It doesn't matter. Even if you're a sinner, you do whatever. If you see the moon, and everybody says, no, we didn't see it, but you're like, I saw it, you have to fast. This is individually obligated. Number 3, he says, the testimony of a just person for those who do not sight it. Now this masala is interesting, right? The testimony, so a Muslim saw it, one person, and he said, I saw the new moon, Ramadan is tomorrow. Once we have a Muslim that says that, we have to accept their shahada. As long as they're not fasiq. They're not somebody who's, sinful and, they make their salah, they don't commit major sins, so on and so forth. They're not fasiq. Khalas. We accept their testimony. Khalas. It's sufficient. Does that make sense? Now there's a couple masail here. The first mas'ala is, how about locality? Is it limited to a certain region, or is this global? Right now, most fiqh councils are going global. They're going global. The Muslim world, they only go national because of political reasons. Every country wants to be independent. They don't want to fall under the authority or opinion or siding of another nation. So it isn't for a fiqh reason, it's more of a political reason. So every nation, Saudi will have their own, and Bahrain and Qatar and all of everybody will have their own. They're like, no, we'll do our own. We're not going to rely on everybody. Some of these countries are large, some of these countries are small. But everybody's like, no, we're going to have our own people, our own telescope and so on, cited for political reasons. But generally, in the West, because there's no Muslim political leader, and the government doesn't get involved in these issues, there isn't a national organization that under the all masajid are subject to. So Muslims in general in the West, they take the testimony of any Muslim world. Does that make sense? That's kind of the predominant fatwa. Now, the issue with this is, why is there a lot of fighting? Right? You would assume if anybody in the world sees it, khalas, we should all fast in the U.S. Why are we still fighting in the U.S.? How come we're not all fasting? The issue is that there's a disagreement about if a person says they saw the moon, but the probability of them seeing the moon is very low. Astronomers, they say like, hey, listen, this night the world is going to be nearly impossible to see the moon except in certain places of the world, based on astronomy. They're like, listen, you can't. They say it is nearly impossible to see the moon. Like I remember there was a year, Yemen saw it and nobody else in the Middle East. And everybody rejected the sighting of Yemen. Why? They said the probability of you seeing the moon in Yemen is very, very low. A few years after, or like 2 years, a year after, they saw the moon in Kenya and Tanzania, some parts of East Africa. And then again, there was the same problem. They're like, listen, the probability of you seeing the moon is not too likely. We're not going to accept it. So there's this issue of probability. Astronomical calculations are saying the probability of seeing the moon is very low. So even if somebody says, even if they're a knowledgeable person, and they're like, I saw the hilal, most fatwa organizations, they're saying, no, we're not going to accept it. They're saying, because the probability of seeing it is what? Very low. Unless Saudi does it, which is wrong. Because the rule has to be across the board. There is no exception for Saudi because they have the Haramain. It doesn't matter. The moon has nothing to do with the Haramain. The moon has nothing to do with Mecca or Medina or Seattle or wherever you are. It's its own event. But the mindset of Muslims, even those who are religious leaders, is like, Saudi saw it. Khalas, the Haram is doing it. Everybody thinks the Haram, Bismillah. How can you not fast while they fast in the Haram? You understand? So there's this, the Muslims, they have so much love for the Haram. They have so much love for the Haram, but sometimes that love blinds their reason. Because it doesn't make sense. If you're going to accept Saudi as moon sighting, even when the probability is low, why are you discriminating against Yemen and Kenya? Does that make sense? It's inconsistent. It doesn't make sense. Pick one. Either we accept the testimony of a Muslim. Doesn't matter the probability. Forget probability. We accept the testimony of a Muslim. A Muslim sees it, we take it. End of conversation. Somebody trustworthy, reliable, they're righteous, they're credible. Khalas. Done. Or we don't take the testimony of anybody if it contradicts the probability. You have to choose one. People choose one, but when it comes to Saudi, they say no. For them, it doesn't matter, probability or no probability, we're going to follow them. Does that make sense? So that year, personally, I adopted the position of Yemen, and I fasted. But I wasn't an imam. Right now, it's more complicated. There's a lot more politics. You have a lot more, teams, communities, organizations are all looking at each other. The city, what is the city doing? It's a lot more complicated. You don't want to be that awkward community. Although other people, sometimes their opinion isn't completely rational. Yeah, does that make sense? So it's more complicated. But generally, it's one of two. If you accept that it's not probable, across the board. That's why a lot of our moon sighting organizations, I know like in Vancouver, they have a masjid, like a union of many masajid. They don't accept any sighting if the probability is low. They say, no, we're not going to accept it. The probability of astronomers is no. It doesn't matter if it's Saudi, it doesn't matter if it's the US, it doesn't matter where it is. If the probability is low, we're not going to accept it. That's respectable. That's reasonable. And so, but those who are saying, we're going to accept it except for Saudi, that's not reasonable. That doesn't make sense. There's an issue with that. The last issue on this is that the calculations. Traditionally, our scholars, 99%, they don't accept calculations for moon sighting. There's a growing opinion of fatwa among scholars that say we're going to accept calculation. And they have some hadith to back it up, and they make their own ta'wil of hadith and so on. One of the greatest things that really, that's persuasive, or two reasons. One is, for salah, we're supposed to look at the sun. Does anybody look at the sun? Everybody looks at their app. Right? No, I don't see anybody looking at the sun. Nobody's doing, okay, let me see the dawn, let me see, shadow is the same length, double the length, and okay, sunset, let me make sure the sunset, let me make sure the red twilight horizon is, nobody's doing that. Everybody's taking what? Calculations. So these mashayikh, they're arguing, they're like, listen, if the calculation fulfills the same purpose as sighting, then why can't we just take the calculation? And they add to that, it unifies the ummah. Easy. Others argue, no, we're leaving the sunnah. The sunnah is to sight, because the Prophet ﷺ said, sight the hilal. Do you understand? That's what the sunnah, the command is. But they're looking at the ma'qul of the command. They're saying, what is the purpose behind the command? The purpose behind the command is to know the moon. If we can know the result of the moon without actually looking at it, we fulfill the purpose of the command. The method is not as important as the objective. Does that make sense? The method is not as important as the objective. The objective is the moon. If we're able to understand the appearance of the moon based on astronomical calculations and so on, why can't there be enough? We do that for salah. We're able to calculate the times of salah, and that's enough. Everybody's praying their salah. The app goes off, Allahu Akbar. Moms, dads, employers, masajid, everybody's going off the apps, right? So they say, why can't we do that for the moon sighting? So there's this growing opinion. I know in the Muslim world, some nations adopted, predominantly I think like Turkey and surrounding nations of Turkey. And so they adopted. And in our city, I know there's one or two masajid that adopt calculation. Majority of them are still on sighting. I lean towards sighting, personally. I would prefer it. But again, there's the issue of community. That is like, you also don't want to break off from the rest of your city and fast on a day where everybody's not fasting. So there's still that, it's problematic. That's just the honesty of it. So a lot of it has to do with circumstance, and people adopt different opinions for the greater unity of the community. Does that make sense? So that's where we're at. There's a lot of inconsistency in the practices of the Muslims. I hope that within time, more Muslims and organizations and masajid and fatwa committees will come to the realization that calculation is enough. If the calendar says this, khalas, bismillah, you can fast. Don't worry about it. Right? And so that's why we have masajid. They're like, listen, our day for Ramadan is set. Our day for Eid is already announced. Eid for us is on day such and such. Salah is that time. A month, 2 months, 6 months ago, they're ready. They have it set for the next 4 or 5 years. They're like, this is what we're praying. This is the day we start fasting, Eid, so on and so forth. And so it does bring a lot of relief and a lot of unity. And there is some fiqhi base for that. But again, the majority of the community, they're still on the traditional practice of sighting the hilal, because that was the command of the hadith, which I respect. And of course, that was the hadith, and that's the explicit word. But scholars, a lot of times, they look at the ma'qul versus the nas. They look at the text, and they look at also the objective of the text. What is the purpose of this text? And so they're using ma'qul. They're looking at the reasoning, the rationale behind the hadith. Right? And so this is the deeper issue in usul al-fiqh, the rationale behind the hadith. What is the purpose of it? Why? How can we understand the purpose, and then how can we adjust and accommodate that in different circumstances? So that's just a general, I guess, I hope I clarified this, inshallah ta'ala. For this year, I'm not sure, but I think for us, we're adopting, pretty confident, it's global sighting at our masjid. And so we're going to wait for global sighting and act according to that. And so we'll also be considering, kind of the predominant, opinion adopted in the community as well. So it's going to be something that will be, we'll try to tread in a way that, inshallah, brings the Muslim community together rather than divide them. That's kind of the goal, inshallah ta'ala. These are different opinions, and so, inshallah, I think it's not so strict that we have to be at each other's throats about it as well. If somebody starts a different day, khair, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair, it's fine. It's not like you're doing something evil. You just have a different opinion, khair. It's not harmful. Does that make sense? Yes, brother.
I heard Sheikh Abdullahi, I'll say it in English.
Yeah.
The Imam or the Mufti of Saudi, he was saying, follow Masjid Omar.
Yeah.
The locality of Masjid Omar. Saudi, because it's Hajj Kuwait, we just follow it.
Exactly.
But there was a writing like Sheikh Hassan.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, follow that locality.
Yeah. Of course, the scholars, they say follow your locality. Generally, that's what you're supposed to do. But the issue is when your location themselves are in disagreement. Whenever they see, the reason when you're a minority in a non-Muslim land and there's no centralized leadership, everybody assumes their own decision. That is why this issue doesn't really exist in the Muslim world, because there's a general centralized leadership that everybody recognizes. Even if they disagree, they'll respect it, because that's the position of leadership. We're going to go with what they go with for the sake of the ummah, for the sake of respecting leadership. Make sense? The issue is when you live in a land where there is no centralized leadership and every imam is independent, and there's no greater amir or organization or institution that says, hey, all of you have to agree to follow this institution. And all of these masajid, you're going to follow this institution. We're going to have a council. We're going to have a policy. We're going to adhere to this policy. It sounds very easy, but human beings, even if they're scholars, even if they're imams, sometimes they can be very difficult to work with. And sometimes they don't get along too well. That's just the nature of it. And so that's the challenge. But the best scenario would be for the leaders to come together, have a civilized conversation, create a policy, compromise, and have that institution be the official institution that gives the fatwa of Ramadan and Eid. And all the other masajid submit and respect and follow and unify. That would be the ideal and best solution. But people are people, and even though they're human beings, and we appreciate our imams and scholars, they work very hard, but sometimes they struggle to cooperate with each other. So that's something, inshallah, I know there's some effort being done by some of the mashayikh in our community to try to unify the community and try to kind of create this unified leadership. I think there was just a meeting of imams a few days ago, and there's an effort going on. I know in other states, also cities, there's an effort of trying to bring, I know Vancouver has Vancouver, BC here in Canada, they have, I think an association of 20 masajid. Not all the masajid, but they got a large number of the masajid of their city to agree to one centralized leadership, and that leadership decides the moon sighting, the Eid, and some major issues, and they all respect that leadership. So that is the direction we want to go. First in a city, and then gradually on a state level, and then probably regional. The entire Pacific Northwest, you would hope that one day the Muslims reach a point where the entire region can agree on one centralized leadership for these issues, so that the Ummah is unified. But so the reason we're struggling now in the West is because there isn't a centralized leadership. And so the Muslims everybody feels entitled to their opinion. People break off into ethnic groups. So certain ethnic groups, okay, that masjid is fasting, we're going to fast too. And if this, okay, so this ethnic group issue. So there's different things that people are, debating. So it's very complex. And so what the brother mentioned about follow the masjid that you pray at. That's the easiest way. The one that you and your family go to, that you're going to fast with and pray with, just go with that. Because if you try to get the right one among everybody, you're just going to confuse yourself. You're going to exhaust yourself. Does that make sense? That's just the best way right now. So my advice is, you have a masjid that you pray with, whatever it is, wherever it is. It doesn't have to be here. That's the masjid. You're like, I'm going to fast with them, I'm going to pray Ramadan with them, that's my masjid. Go with them. Khalas. Don't confuse yourself. Is that sufficient? Inshallah? Inshallah ta'ala. So I hope it clarifies why there's all this moon fighting and about the moon sighting and all and so on. Two other masail regarding this. He says the informing of a just person whose information is reliable, whether the heart is inclined to it being or not, and also with the information of an unreliable source if one is inclined to it being true. So the informing of a just person, not the information. So if a just person, somebody adil is what they call it, then you take their word, or somebody who you trust, you take their word, you have to fast on that. We don't have to worry too much about that. And then number 5, he said, with the perception that Ramadan had commenced, this is for the person who is doubtful of it. So if you were doubtful, and then you found out that Ramadan actually did start, maybe you found out late, then you have to fast that day and make it up. There's 4, he says, rahimahullah, there are 4 conditions for the validity of fasting. The conditions for the validity of fasting are 4. Islam, you have to be Muslim to fast. Can a non-Muslim fast? They can fast for an educational purpose, to get the experience, but they don't get the validity where that they fulfill a wajib with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? But they said, hey, I want to fast. Go fast. Come on, we'll give you the experience. Come have dinner with us as well, And we'll show them hospitality and kindness. But they don't meet the requirement to say, like, I fasted with Allah, I fulfilled this ibadah. No, you have to be Muslim for your ibadah to be valid. And number 2, aql, sanity. And so if a person is mentally insane or mentally doesn't have enough comprehension to understand what fasting is, then they don't have to fast. And this also excludes children under the age of 8 or 7. Because this is not wujub, this is validity. So children over the age of 7, 8, they can fast, it's valid. They get the fasting of Islam, but it's not wajib. It's valid, but it's not wajib. And we all know that we want to encourage our kids to start fasting even once every few days. And as they get old, once they reach the age of like 8, once every few days, and then eventually, a couple times a week, and and then, as they get older, by the age of 10, 11, fasting most of the month, and then by the age of 12, 13, they should be fasting the whole month. That's kind of our goal. That's where we want them to be. Number 3, purity from hayd, which is menstruation. A woman cannot fast when she's on menstruation. And so if a woman has menstruation during the day of fasting, her fast is nullified, and she has to make it up. She has to make it up. If a woman gets her menses, if a woman's menses ends halfway through a day of fasting, what does she do? Let's say she's on her menses. Dhuhr time, her menses ended. She has to take a shower. She has to pray. But what does she do the rest of the day? Does she fast? Does she not fast? What's the hukum? The Shafi'i school says she has to fast. The Shafi'i law is that what? She has to fast. Because she's pure, she's Muslim, she's sane, she meets all the requirements, she has to fast. It doesn't fulfill the wajib, but she fasts for the sanctity of that day. Because the days of Ramadan are sacred. So she fasts because of the sanctity of the day of Ramadan. Although it isn't valid because she was on her menses in the morning, she fasts the rest of the day because of the sanctity of that day. Number 4, he says, وَعِلْمٌ بِكُونِ الْوَقْتِ قَابِلًا لِلصَّوْمِ. Knowledge of its appropriate time. Right? You have to know that this is Ramadan. This is Ramadan. So these are shurut sihha. We call these the requirements for validity. Shurut sihha are different than shurut wujub. Shurut wujub mean who is it wajib on. Shurut sihha means who is it accepted from. You understand? It's accepted from a young kid who's 8, 9, 10 years old, but it's not wajib. Make sense? So the validity is different than wujub, but wajib is higher. So he says the shurut wujub, or the conditions for fasting becoming wajib, are 5. The conditions for fasting becoming wajib are 5. Number 1 is Islam. They have to be Muslim. Number 2, they have to be mukallaf, reaching the age of puberty and sanity. So once they reach the age of maturity, a woman has her menses, a boy reaches a wet dream, they have to fast, unless they're ill or traveling or they have an excuse. So I know as parents, oftentimes we're like, man, my subhanAllah, my kid, he's 12, he's reached maturity, but he's only a kid. You have to tell him to fast. If he's sick, or if he's getting sick, or she's getting sick, it's affecting their health, then you can tell them stop. But you can't simply say, don't fast because, you're just a kid, it's okay. That parent affection you have, you're a kid, you don't have to fast, it's okay. No, you tell them to fast. But the moment they start to get sick, you see that maybe they're developing a little sickness, they're exhausted, tell them, khalas, break your fast, get hydrated. Even yourself. If you're midday through the day and you notice like I'm getting a cold and I'm getting sick and I'm like, break your fast. Because you'd rather break your fast and recover sooner than get really sick by iftar time and then be down for 4 or 5 days. Does that make sense? So if you're getting sick or you see somebody getting sick, tell them, brother, khalas, break your fast. So you don't get any more sick. Right? So for kids, if you have young kids, once you see them not feeling well, tell them break your fast. But initially, encourage them to fast. Initially, we should encourage them to fast. Number 3, ability. And so this is again health. The commentary, he says, one is capable of bearing the fast. Someone who fasting exhausts because of advanced years or having an illness from which he is unlikely to recover are not required to fast. Right? So you have the ability, physical ability, where you can hold fast for an entire day. Some people, they don't have the ability, they can't, right, if they have diabetes or they're on dialysis or something of that sort, they can't fast. They physically can't. Their body will not function appropriately and it will cause health problems. For that person, there's no fasting. There's no wujub on them. It's not obligatory. Number 8 is health. And this is illness, if somebody is ill. So ability is something, a condition that you have. Illness is more of something that occurs, due to circumstance. Does that make sense? So abilities, you have a condition. You have diabetes or you're on dialysis or something of that sort. You just can't fast. You don't have the ability. Another person being ill is, okay, you have a cold, you have a fever. You have a serious cold or you have a fever or you get the COVID or whatever the reason is. You are actually ill. That also removes the obligation of fasting. Number 5, the children who are praying in the women's musalla, I ask the parents, inshallah, to grab their children, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Number 5 is muqim, non-traveler. So if a person is a non-traveler, they are obligated to fast. But if they're a traveler, they're not obligated, even if they fast ongoing, even if their fast continues. Like if they're like a pilot, or they're, we have a lot of brothers in the community that are truck drivers. They're allowed to break their fast. They don't have to, but it's not wajib for them. If they were to say, I'm not going to fast, I'm traveling, I'm just going to make up later, they can do that. It's permissible. Even if their trip is ongoing, as long as they meet the requirement of fasting, they're allowed to break their fast. And so, inshallah, we'll suffice with that for the night. And then tomorrow night, inshallah, we'll continue with the wajibat al-sawm. As we read into the chapter, we probably, I would say 2 more nights, inshallah. By Sunday night, we can conclude the section of fasting. And then we'll have a list of miscellaneous masail. Using, some person has asthma, they use their inhaler, using eye drops, getting your dental cleaning during the day, using, nose spray, using ear drops, injection, just a variety of miscellaneous masail about fasting. I'll try to get maybe a list of 10 or so, just kind of mas'alas that come up. If you want me to add to that, inshallah, please let me know if you have certain masail. I can add it to the list. And on the last night of fasting, we'll discuss all of these like miscellaneous issues that come up, inshallah ta'ala. And so that is the end of tonight's dars. We'll continue on tomorrow night bi'idhnillah ta'ala. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والحمد لله رب العالمين.